Hi guys. So today we'll continue part 4B of absolute references and relative references. So we discussed lightly yesterday on absolute and relative references when you're dragging your cells down. This actually works the same way when you're using the macros. So this is the record macro function. When this is pressed down, you are going to be using relative references. When this is not pressed, you are using absolute references, which means when you are referring your Visual Basic code to a location, it means that it will be locked to that location, whatever you do. So it will always get from that cell or from that row or that workbook, whichever you're referring to, right? So we talked about referring or referencing in the last few videos, and that's why absolute and relative references are very important. Again, this is an object-oriented programming language, which means that it has to know what the noun in the statement is and what you want it to do, what with whom or who does what, or who undergoes the state of being in that condition, or who is the action for. All right. So I'm gonna give you an example of an absolute reference recorded. All right. All right. Let's go ahead and go to this part. Okay. So what you can do when you're starting out and you're doing your Excel, what you can do is you can start with the two window mode. Right. Okay, we can do that now. Right. So I don't have all of the Visual Basic commands memorized. But what I can do is when I'm going to try to use a command, I can use the record function to know what the command name is. Now there are some disadvantages to using the recording macros function, but we'll discuss that in a future video. Okay? So what we're gonna do, we're gonna try to record a video. Oh, sorry, record a macro. So we're going to start with clicking on record macro. Window pops up, give it a name. Let's say it's named macro 1. Okay, let's give it a shortcut, Control C. Store in this workbook. Okay, let's name it absolute reference. Okay, anytime that you are recording a video, you can actually toggle this relative or absolute reference. Okay, so if you're gonna look here, you already have this. Okay, sorry, I need to put this here. So it already has this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put here January. I'm sorry, not here. Recording a macro. Go here. So look, it selects the window and it changes the window size. Okay, let's name it January. Okay, and then I press tab, and I type February. Then press enter. There's 1, tab 2, enter. 3, tab 4. Okay, so that's my macro. I'm going to go ahead and stop it. Okay, so this is what it would look like. Now to compare that to what a relative reference macro would do, so now we're going to record a macro that is a relative reference. Okay, so make sure that this is clicked. Click on the record macro. Let's name it macro 2, and the shortcut is Control Shift B. All right. Okay, never mind. Relative reference example. Okay, so what this does is, okay, I'm selecting a cell. Right, you can see here. Move forward, move down, move left, whichever way I like. Down, down, so that it's also on the 42nd, just for comparing the two. And I say January. Then I press forward, February. Then enter. Okay, left. I put 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I use the arrow keys to move about. Okay, let's say I want to format this too, just for reference sake. Okay, I'm gonna color you all yellow and red. Okay, what happened? All right, developer, and then I stop recording. Okay, so now we're gonna compare the two. With the absolute reference, once I delete this, anytime I run, again, what was my shortcut? Control Shift C. Control Shift C, sorry, Control Shift C, it will go to the 40-second slot of this sheet, okay, range B42. Okay, so this is locked on a range, not exactly on a sheet. So I can go here and just try, right? It will still go back to that. Okay. Same spot. See? Whichever sheet I go to, it will always go to the 42nd. Okay. That. Okay. Just to show you, it will always go to the 40-second slot. That's where it's always gonna stop. Okay. So that's what absolute referencing does. Now you can imagine when you're using your code and it's referenced to a range only, it will move through sheets. But if you are referencing, or you're fully qualified your reference to that sheet, to that cell, to that application, to that workbook, then it will only happen on that sheet, on that workbook, on that range, on that file. Okay. All right, let's go back here. Okay. What about relative reference? Relative reference is actually move based on, you could say, active cells at the moment, just for the sake of convenience, right? Okay, let's go ahead and delete that, delete this, delete this. Right, if you look at the relative reference macro, I used a couple of different moves that we didn't use on the first one. Okay, go ahead and just go ahead and delete this. Okay, so it's Control Shift B. When I press Control Shift B, okay, look, it jumped. Let's go ahead and try that here. It jumped. It jumped. Okay, so it's moving based on my cursor. Remember, when I started doing this, I pressed a couple of arrows down and left before I typed January. That's because it's moving relative to a spot. Okay, so that's what it means when I say relative reference. It is also the same principle we tried to discuss here when you're using relative and absolute references when you are creating your formulas, like you could see here. Okay, if you have not watched the previous video, go ahead and watch it. It might bring you insight, especially if you are a heavy Excel user and you don't know what absolute and relative references are. Okay, absolute and relative references work also for recording macros. Okay, so that summarizes our discussion for today for recording macros, and I hope you learned how to use the macro recorder, how to run a code, okay, and how to use the absolute and relative references in the developer toolbar ribbon, developer ribbon. Okay, so if you'd like to see more content and you'd like to see more of how to learn more how to use macros, I'll give you some tips on how to use these recorded ones. Okay, and then we will discuss that at a later time in the future. Okay, thank you for your time. This is Ralph signing out.